Hi, I'm iKia, and for today's video I want to give an in-depth guide to named items and where they drop or where they come from, as to say their sourcing. And to coincide with this video, I'm releasing a written guide and two images that this relies on basically, as it is not clear to everyone, I feel, where some items do and don't come from. So I am hoping to help with that a little bit. As always, with my in-depth guides, it'll be two chapters. In the first chapter, I'll go quickly through basically the necessary knowledge and give the information to how to read the guide, basically. And in the second part, we'll go more in-depth. And both will be, of course, time-stamped, and you can jump around as you require. So yeah, let's jump into the shortcut. As here is that written guide. And it will, of course, be linked down below, as well links to both of the images that it contains, although even those are, of course, also linked in the guide itself. But I feel the images are the worthwhile part. As we briefly take a look through here, and I'll go in depth, of course, in the in-depth section, but just to explain it briefly in a short section, the lexicon is up here as to what we are going to discuss. And if I make it a little bit bigger and I should grab my little red circle, we can see that, yeah, I've laid it out as LZ being everything that isn't a DZ, and DZ being everything that is a DZ. And that's usually our terminology that we use for differentiating basically everything that is outside of a DZ. Even though light zone is not a term that gets used by the game at all. And then LZ plus DZ is that it drops in both, which can be of some informational use, especially if you, for instance, if some piece that you are going to farm and you are willing to farm DZs, not all pieces do drop in, not all named pieces drop in the DZs. So sometimes it is futile to try to go get them there. And that makes it a little bit important. As for most players, of course, they don't go into the DZs at all and will only get their DZ items by the other sources. And special is just from a different source than drops, usually. And all of them will be listed below the images as well, all of the specials. And we'll go over those in the in-depth part. But yeah, here is my list again that I also used in the DZ, the anti-DZ exclusive wording. As yeah, I feel you shouldn't call them DZ exclusives, they're DZ items. Because calling them exclusives is counterintuitive to anybody that hears the word exclusive. So it's better to call them DZ items because they're not exclusive to the DZ. Not anymore, let's say. And not anymore since this release of Warlords of New York. This isn't a recent thing. Let's change on terminologies. As we'll go through it, basically, the DZ items can come from DZ item drops, DZ vendors, DZ caches, conflict caches, which are all the PvP ways of getting them. But then, of course, all the PvE available ways as well of named item caches, which can come from Countdown Store, the Season Track, the League, and Global Event Rewards, Global Event Stars, of course, as well. So there's a lot of ways of getting named items nowadays. The ones in previous seasons that weren't in the base game, for instance, these are also in the legacy caches, if they were on a season track, and sometimes the Countdown Store third item as to complete the list up there. As we then move down to have the image, as you can see, this is all of the weapons by subcategory. So assault rifles, submachine guns, light machine guns, everything separated out. It lists them by going through them and saying LZ, DZ, LZ, LZ plus DZ, DZ, or special, categorizing all of the weapons in this image. And if we go down a little bit further, categorizing all of the gear, named gear into all of these items. And if we actually briefly jump into the images as they are linked from there, and also you can click the link that is linked above them. This is the weapon one, and I've basically gone through, put every weapon in here, put them in the order, in the position that they need to be, which was a lot more work than I expected. But yeah, especially going through this and understanding which ones are especially DZ drops, as that's what most people care about. Because yeah, all of the LZ plus DZ and the LZ ones, you can just farm by playing PvE end, which most people do. The DZ ones, of course, are a bit more rare, especially for only PvE players. So yeah, there is some interest there. And the special ones we'll go through in the in-depth guide as to where they all come from, but almost all of the special ones either require something specific as doing field research or getting them from hunters, or they are linked to some specific thing. In the case of Altrestia, we'll go through that entire list. That list is underneath every image. If I scroll back up, here's the list for the weapons, and then underneath gear, there's the list for gear, what all of the specials, where they come from. So from the written guide and the 2 images, you basically can get all of the information that you actually need. But we'll go through it in an in-depth guide way as well in a second. But this was basically the short guide. You can use the 2 images as provided for the weapons one to just see quickly which ones they are. As especially, of course, these lists already exist, and I'll talk about that in the start of the in-depth part. As I am not, of course, a primary source for these, as I don't go in-depth into keeping track of what drops in LZ plus DZ or LZ. I do know all of the DZ ones by heart almost, but most of us use lists that are out there, but those lists are oftentimes hard to parse, and that's why I made these, especially the gear one as well, to just easily go through and go like, oh, okay, for especially less advanced players, they won't know which ones are DZs, especially, but for me even, I do sometimes, I'm willing to go farm in the DZs. But for instance, quite recently, I wanted to go farm a closer in the DZ, but then I know to just look at that list. For others, they might not know. But in here, I can quickly come in here and just go like, oh, okay, I can't go farm a closer in the DZ because it doesn't drop in the DZ. So it's for stuff like that. And I feel this could be helpful, so I made one. Yeah, let's move on to the in-depth part, as this was the short part. And to start off the in-depth part of this guide, I briefly first want to introduce the primary source that I'm using, as I'm not the primary source. On this one, I'm using someone else's work, which is from the Reddit spreadsheet, as they have basically all the items data mined to where they drop, which is the list that I mostly was using and before this, and still have used as the primary source for these. And actually, if we open up that link, that goes to here, which is the Division 2 gear attribute sheet. And in here are tabs for high-end named gear, as I've clicked it up there. And in here is basically the list that I'm taking and just visualizing with a graphic. That's basically all I've done here. Although, of course, that was a little bit of work. But I feel that having this graphic, and I'll do my best to maintain it as well as new items come into it, is a much easier way than, for me at least I feel, than going into this list, as sometimes you don't remember the exact name or the exact spelling, because you can control find, of course, here, control F, and find the item that you're after, but sometimes I don't remember the exact name. I remember it's a chest, it's a for instance, quite recently, Brazo's backpack, what was it called again? And then instead of going through this list and going, Hermano, instead I can look at that list, and much easier, at least for me, for someone that knows all the items, to see where they are. But I hope it's useful to others as well, and that's why I made them, and I'm sharing them as well. And they also, of course, have a high-end named weapon list, which is that tab, and that contains all of the weapons. So I basically consulted this, and I've used this as the primary source. There is some conflict between this spreadsheet and the official Discord spreadsheet as to what items sometimes drop where, with especially LZDZ ones. I feel that I trust this spreadsheet more, perhaps. Usually this comes from data mined info. But there might be some errors in my list if the errors were in this list as well. So, but if there are any, I'll correct them. I'll keep a bit more of an eye out, especially when running around the DZ, what is dropping in there, and if an item does drop in there that I have mislabeled as being lights on only, then I'll fix those. But yeah, so this gear attribute sheet, and also just as a general tool, it is a very strong piece of information. So if you didn't know it yet, please go check it out. It is linked in the guide at the very top, as it is there. So that is my primary sourcing, just to introduce that. As we did go through the lexicon and where the DZ items, DZ PvP named items originate already in the short guide, I'll skip those. We'll move on to especially this special list as it is down here, and I'll actually go into the images and just briefly talk about going through all of the categories and what basically drops where and which ones are, of course, a little bit interesting maybe to try to find. As of course, yeah, in the AR category, we don't have any real great DZ items, as I'll mostly be discussing the DZ and the special items, because yeah, those are the more rare items that people are after. And so we don't have really any good DZ ones, although the Manic and the Rail Splitter both are decent and have their own mechanics that you can kind of use. In the special, we have the Shield Splinter here, and the Shield Splinter is tied to getting all of the base game hunters, the pre-Warlords of New York hunters, and getting all of the 8 encounters and killing the 12 hunters and getting the 8 encounters, because there are some encounters that are multiple hunters. Once you have the 8 keys, you can open the chest that it is in the White House, and you will get your first Shield Splinter from there. Once you've gotten all 8 keys, so you don't have to actually open the chest, but once you have all 8 keys, Cassie will also start having it in her inventory, letting you sometimes get a decent one from there if your first one didn't drop, for instance, with good stats. Although, of course, it comes with a fixed talent, so you can always just put damage to targets out of cover on it and optimize it up. But sometimes Cassie has one that is closer, a lot closer than maybe one of that you've gotten. And yeah, that's where the Shield Splinter comes from. If we then go to the Savage Wolverine, and I'll actually jump back to the guide and scroll down a little bit before I say something stupid, because I always forget which ones they come from. So this is craftable from Blueprint, and the Blueprint comes from Firewall Research, Firewall Research 4, Stage 4. As the weapons, all of them come from Stage 4. The gear that comes from Field Research comes from Stage 2. And that is going to be from all of them. Because, yeah, there's 3 tied to the 3 specializations that are Field Research. As I'll briefly as well then jump back. As we go onto the Slayer. The Slayer is a Christmas item, a holidays item. It only drops from the Hoarder that spawns during the December season, December and January. As it needs to be basically toggled by the devs for him to have his Christmas hat and drop Christmas gear. As yeah, it is a weapon that is basically useless damage-wise. It has a functionality of disorienting enemies, and that can be maybe useful sometimes, although there are better ways than doing it with the Slayer. But it is a decently fun weapon, and it's annoying that it's not available year-round, as also some other items will come up as not year-round. In the DZ section of it, of course, we have the Apartment and the Dark Winter. The Dark Winter is a decent B-tier weapon, and one that can be decently useful. The Apartment also is around that same area of being a B-tier. Measured on its own is pretty bad. Perfect measured on the MPX is decent, but the MPX has such a long reload that kind of kills it. A fast stance MPX is so much more of a better choice, I feel. As we move on to the Stinger comes from the friend referral system that I'm not certain actually still works correctly. I've heard mixed reports, some people saying that it still works, although most of them seem to be on console, and some people just saying that they tried to make it work, have done basically the requisites that are tied to it, and haven't gotten it. So I'm uncertain at this point if it still works or not, but it did come from that system, and I have gotten it from back when it was available. So it may no longer be really workable to get it. The Sleipnir comes from, and I'll go back to this list again just to check as we have it here. And it is very small, so but yeah, it is the Gunner Field Research 4, as it is here. As I'll put, yeah, Gunner Field Research 4. is tied to the Sleipnir, as that unlocks the blueprint, and then you can craft it from the blueprint. The Black Friday and the Good Times are both the DZ LMGs, and both of them are actually decently good. The Good Times is actually pretty good and usable. The Black Friday, with its perfect talent, it is better than the normal version of Unhinged, but it still is like a mid-tier weapon basically. There are in the normal variants, there's actually much better choices there. In the rifles, we don't have any special ones. We do have the Virginian, which is a decent choice, and of course we have the Harmony and Everlasting Gaze. And the Harmony especially is really good for skill builds, to drone builds, especially, and even some other styles of builds as well, as it is perfect perfect in sync. Although, of course, you also have the test subject in ARs that does basically the same thing. The Everlasting Gaze is perfect perpetuation, and it's decent. It's not one to go for, but if you have one, it can fit into some builds. If we then move on to shotguns, we then have from the DZ and the backup boomstick and the rock and roll. The rock and roll is quite useful for chest strikers, I feel, as especially if you are using the chest, having that extra 10 rounds is actually useful for stacking up to full. And then in the specials, we have, of course, the Enforcer and the Send-Off. The Send-Off comes from Firewall, no, actually, let me make sure that I say this correctly, because I don't actually ever remember these. It comes from Technician, actually. Good thing I did go and check. Then for the send-off comes from Technician, Stage 4 Field Research. And once you have the blueprint from the field research, you can just craft them. And then the Enforcer was tied to the pre-order bonuses for Warlords of New York and is no longer available in any form, to my understanding. Some sources state that it can drop in gameplay. I believe that is wrong. I've gotten it to be changed because it did state that in the official Discord's spreadsheet for a long time, but I basically disputed that to the point that they agreed and took it away. So it's no longer on that list. And hopefully, as far as I know, there is no way of getting an Enforcer unless you have pre-ordered Warlords in New York. If you then move on to the Pinprick from the DZ, there's the marksman rifles, the sniper rifles. Pinprick isn't great, but it is a weapon that you can try to get the most out of by using its talent, but then you're still falling behind the determined white death. So it's not a useful thing, but yeah, for prestige reasons, of course, you want to have the full DZ set. If we then move on to the O'Carroll, the O'Carroll shares its properties with the Slayer. It comes only from that December-January hoarder that with the Christmas hat, and doesn't drop, as far as I know, from any other source outside of that. So it is very much tied to that time. It basically does the effect of True Patriot, of doing that fireworks when you kill someone with a headshot. It is a minor thing. It can be just as a fun thing, or sometimes, especially right now, because we're basically as far from it as we can be. Basically, nobody remembers it, and you can sometimes make somebody go like, "Oh, what was that? We don't have a True Patriot in the team. Why are they exploding?" So it can be fun for that. Same with the Slayer, actually, as well. And then we have Adressia, and Adressia is tied to the Nemesis quest. Basically, you only get this if you don't have a Nemesis already, which for most people mean that, or any of the parts already, in the exotic parts that are used to craft it. If you don't have any of them in your inventory, then it will drop on your first normal run of titles. So not the story run. If you're going from World Tier 4 to World Tier 5, you have to do it on World Tier 5 on normal. Basically, it's the first time that you can go and get it, where you grab a key and you open a specific door, and there's a crate inside, and you get the Adressia, and then you have to dismantle that to get the first part of the Nemesis quest line. And if you don't have a Nemesis and don't have any parts in your inventory, so if you have crafted the Nemesis already and have taken away all of those parts, what you can do is actually put your Nemesis on a secondary character and then go back into title and basically get the Adressia every time, which can be used to maybe put it into expertise, although that seems pretty slow because you have to get pretty far into title basin, but is a technique that could be used. And then if we then move on to the pistols, the two pistols that are tied to the DZ are Orbit and Cart TDI Custom, TDI Cart Custom actually in that order. The Orbit is a decently, is a funnish tool to use. It is a perfect finisher and is decent looking and decent to use. It is a hard-hitting pistol, which can be handy for just getting that one last shot at and getting perfect finisher. Although most people will gravitate towards having a TDI Cart Custom because, yeah, that's the +1 skill tier weapon instead of a secondary attribute that has +1 skill tier. That +1 skill tier is only when you're holding it, so it isn't active at all times. It's only when you're holding it, but while holding it, you can do some funky stuff, especially with revive hives by having extra charge on it, so you can toss it out, revive somebody else, and still keep a charge for yourself. And is an item that, yeah, is in, yeah, most players will want to have one of them at least. As that gets us through all of the weapons, and we'll briefly hop on over to talking about gear in a second. And let us move on to the named gear and give it the same treatment. As yeah, I'll be mostly discussing the DZ items and the special ones, as yeah, most of us know all of the LZ items, and actually somewhere in the future I will come back and having all of these items, the pictures of them, as well with the exotics. One of my plans is to make a tier list, as I think that might be interesting to give my opinions on a tier list level and do it basically, try to give some information out that way. Starting out, let's discuss the masks, as we have the Hollow Man here from the DZ drops. As the Hollow Man, of course, comes with its damage to health special, and it can be a decently useful item, especially for if you're already going for a hazard protection build, as that's the first brand bonus, of course, from Yao. And it does find some use, so it is, and it's very much tied to basically PvP kind of end of things, because yeah, you in there especially you do want to have an hazard protection build, usually at least a version of it, to deal with all of the pesky bleed builds and all of the pesky spotting builds as well. So yeah, moving on to the chill out. The chill out is the same, is in the same way as the Slayer and the O'Carroll. It only drops around December and January. It gets patched in to be the Christmas order. So whenever that patch happens, it's usually in the patch notes that the Christmas Hoarder is activated. And the chill out is one of where the Slayer and the O'Carroll are very much joke items. The chill out actually does have some uses, although not as many as people use it for. It's very much only a PFE build. You can get a few more percentages out of it with a chill out mask, because it lets you have a Fox's Prayer in there. But it isn't available all year round, and that's also the reason I don't use it in my PFE builds on my build pictures, because nobody starting out that doesn't have that item would be able to recreate them. So it very much is one of those items. I feel very strongly that actually all three could be just added back into maybe a special way of drops, but that you could at least still get them. Maybe even if they were just in the named item caches, that would already be an improvement on what we have now. Going straight down, we'll go with the Door Kicker's Knock, and the Door Kicker's Knock is pretty bad. It's a perfect spark. It doesn't find much use. The Ferocious Call can actually be quite useful with its perfect Overwatch. Overwatch is actually one of those talents that can be quite useful, especially in a raid setting, because one person basically gives up about 10% of their own damage, and everybody else gains 10% of their damage. in actual output, because usually people already have some source of total weapon damage, because yeah, it is 12%, of course, but in actual output it's around 10ish% if already somebody has vigilance on a backpack or is running obliterate, for instance. Moving on to the hunter killer with perfect intimidate. Intimidate used to be a lot better, but then even then the perfect version was a little bit worse than the normal version, because you're giving up a brand bonus, of course. And it's with the changes to Intimidate sees a lot less use nowadays. And the builds that it does see use in benefit a lot more from all of the damage brands. So it isn't that useful a piece. And it is the counterpart to the Shield Splinter in that it comes from hunters. You need to kill the 13 Warlords of New York hunters, or well, complete the 8 encounters, which will be 13 hunters, as some of them are multiple hunters in one encounter. And once you do, you will have 8 keys. You can open the chest, which is in Haven, by where Kelso is in Haven, next to the exotic wall. And once you have this, in the same way with the Shield Splinter, it gets added to Cassie's inventory once you have 8 keys. You don't have to actually open the chest or receive your first one. Once you have the 8 keys, it'll be on Cassie. And Cassie can then provide you with maybe a better version if you've got a double blue version. Because even if you're going to use this, it's likely that you will need a crit chance, crit damage one that you can even maybe recore to red, or if you want to keep the blue core, at least having one of the 2 crit chance, either chance or damage on there. Moving on to the Vedmestia, as I'm likely butchering that word, but that's how I'll pronounce it here and likely get corrected. This one comes from the Gunner Stage 2 Field Research, as you'll get the blueprint from there once you have completed that, and then you can craft it. It is perfect braced. It is not the best talent. It can be useful, especially with playing around with braced, but giving up a chest talent for a utility talent hurts a little bit. And well, it does find some use, and especially if you have one, go play around with it for a few hours, see how it feels. But for most people, they will come to the conclusion that it's not worth giving up the chest talent for a utility talent, basically, because you give up a ton of damage. But it can feel good sometimes to just use it and just have a lot of a really fast reload on the weapon without even a reload talent, and just outputting and just sitting in cover and not having to deal with the weapon spread at all. But that's also kind of what kills it. You need to be in cover, and most more advanced players will use cover, but will not use the cover system. We'll hide behind high cover and shoot, but we won't actually use the cover system, which kind of hurts hurts it a little bit. If we move on to the Claws Out, the Claws Out can actually be useful as a different part to use than the Dodge City holster in some Regulus builds, Hunter builds. As yeah, it does kind of make sense stat-wise. You can get a little bit more out of especially the Regulus, but you will need to find a headshot version and then record it to red for it to be viable for use, which of course is somewhat harder to get. But yeah, if you have one and you can put it in there and you make use of it in there. So it is an actual usable piece, which isn't the case for all named items here, of course. Moving on to the ammo dump. The ammo dump is very much an item that doesn't see much use. It increases. It has an extra stat of extra ammo capacity, which could be useful, but it's on a Badger Tough piece, so most people don't run it, because especially if you're running a shotgun, you're likely running Hunter's Fury, and you don't want to use the chest or backpacks of Hunter Fury. So putting in a holster like this is kind of going to hurt it, hurt the build. So that's why it doesn't find much use. It is craftable from the field research. Again, it's a blueprint that you receive from the field research from Firewall, Stage 2. And once you have it, you can craft them. And in that way, you can kind of go for the stats that you want. One of the other interesting things of it is, of course, that it has 1 stat extra. It is one of those pieces in the same way as well with the Claws Out. Actually, it is 1 stat more. So you can end up with 1 stat more on that counter, which may throw some people off sometimes. In backpacks, we don't have any specials, but we do have several decent choices. Although decent, okay choices. So we have Devil's Due. Devil's Due is with a perfect clutch. It can be useful. It doesn't find much use. You can use it kind of in PvE solo as a survival tool. But I find that a Memento is actually just a better version of it. Even though you're giving up some stat on the damage end, you're just gaining more on the utility end. And regeneration, I find, is a little bit more consistent than trying to use the clutch mechanics. As we then move on to Liquid Engineer, which is a perfect bloodsucker, and that can find some use, especially trying to combine it with Intimidate as a good source of bonus armor. But it's giving up a backpack talent. That's the issue with many of these choices, is they give up a backpack talent, and in doing so, they really hurt to be used. But then we move on to the Matador, and the Matador does find a lot of use, as it is basically one of the meta ways of PvP nowadays to have a blue core Matador to be in trading builds, as we call them, to basically stack armor as far as possible, to have perfect adrenaline rush on the backpack, to have unbreakable on the chest once it gets fixed again. And basically just outlast your enemies while dealing enough damage by having a lot of crit chance crit damage. So it finds use in there. It used to be a great way of going for Intimidate as well. Although usually you would go with a different brand bonus, because the brand bonus of Walker and Harris isn't great, especially the One Piece. But yeah, it does find some use. And then, yeah, we have the Gift, which is a gift once you get it. It is very, very much a minor upgrade to having it in a Providence build. If you're already running a Vigilance backpack, which most people are in a Providence build with a glass chest, if you're going Providence as well, the perfect glass chest, the sacrifice. And the Gift has 1 second less before it comes back online. So it goes from being disrupted for 4 seconds once you get hit to only being down for 3 seconds once you get hit. So it's a minor upgrade, but it is an upgrade. So once you get one, very much worth using. As we then move on to the mask, as I briefly, the gloves, as I briefly just double check which ones we are going to talk about. We have the Death Grips, and the Death Grips can find some use actually, especially I quite often use Death Grips, which may sound, which may some people go like, wait, why would you use Death Grips? For boosting other people through Warlords of New York, and that should then don't make people go, oh, okay, yeah. Because having that on kill, which if I'm running it, and I run it in an Eclipse, I run it instead of that glove slot, where I have in all my characters, I have the glove be the electric piece. I swap it to a Death Grips with status effect, and that means that seeing as I'm killing everything, because that's what the Eclipse is doing just by sending out the pulse to basically kill entire rooms, as it is on story difficulty and it's under-leveled versus the level 40 character. That means that you're gaining a lot of armor back, and that means that you can just run through stuff and not care. I'll not have to play in any way conservatively. I can just run through it. And that's the one use that I've found for Death Grips. For the rest, in actual level 40 play, in trying to play it in Heroics, it's always going to be a bad choice because of the brand bonus. So it doesn't ever really work out. You're much better off just having something else, just dealing a little bit more damage and having your survivability come from somewhere else, for instance, a memento or a shield. Because yeah, trying to face tank or trying to tank with your personal armor is not something that works beyond hard, not even unchallenging, I feel. And then we have the Motherly Love Gloves, which have extra shield or have extra skill health as one of their stats. And that can actually be quite useful, although Empress does basically the same on its first piece. In the past, it used to be handy for getting shield held up, but nowadays I would say it's easier to just use one piece Empress if you're going for that same plus 10 skill health that this has. So it does become a little bit useless. And yeah, it doesn't find much use. And then we'll go to the knee pads. And the knee pads, of course, are the Murakami ones, the Emperor Guards, which have the +1 regen. These find some use in regen builds, for armor regen builds, but armor regen builds don't find much use in general. So I have a few in my build collection as regen builds, although I have gone from having multiple regen builds to only one surviving one. And that should be a little bit indicative of how I feel about them. They just, especially compared for me to tech tanks, I would much rather have a tech tank where I'm hiding behind a shield, a strong shield that is getting healed, instead of trying to regen armor back up. Although in the past, some DZ builds used to be around having regen as their main stat, together with an SMG and then crit damage. Although SMGs have been greatly have reduced capabilities in the DZ nowadays, so they don't find much use anymore. And yeah, that's us having gone through all of the items as I jump back to the guide. And yeah, everything will be linked below, and I hope that in some ways this was informative. One last thing I want to add is I'll keep this guide up to date with new items as seasons come in, of course, or maybe if even stuff get moved around, although quite unlikely as that hasn't really happened much. And I will, in the guide itself, it says last updated and then a year date, a year, month, and a day. So keep that in mind whenever you're looking at it in the future. Check when it has been last updated. If it hasn't been updated for a while, I may have moved on. If this is years in the future, in 2028, and you're still coming here, it might not have been updated in a while, and then you can poke me on Discord and try to get me to update it. As yeah, this very much was this guide. As for my next video, it's going to be about, I was going to do the ongoing directive build showcase, although that will be actually recorded before the next video that I'm going to do, and that is a rebuttal to Fog of War's takes on the St. Elmo and what it means, as there is one glaring issue with it, and I'm mostly disappointed that nobody has actually called it out. I'm not so much even disappointed in him putting that bad information out there, but that nobody actually has taken him to task for putting that bad information out there. So I will be I'll take it upon myself to do that. Afterwards, we'll have the ongoing directive showcase, which will be following this video up in a few days. As that will also be recorded live if you're seeing this video as it releases on the Sunday that this video releases on the evening on my Twitch channel, and I'll be recording it live in front of people. As yeah, I've quite taken to enjoying doing the build showcases live there. So it is linked below, and you can join me there if you're interested in seeing a little bit of behind the scenes of how those come together. So yeah, I hope you either join me on Twitch or in my coming videos, and have a good night.